everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which once again saw no real new major releases, and so therefore Avatar: The Way of Water continues its worldwide domination, crossing $2.1 billion, still very much tracking its way to probably getting somewhere between this and $2.5 billion by the end of its run. And now you have the mainstream media continuing to run with the narratives that it's passing this film and that film. But what's the actual truth? What's the actual fact when you adjust for, that's right, the word of the day once again, and the thing that triggers so many people, inflation. We'll talk about that and show the charting according to the numbers and where the film actually stands in comparison to those movies. Still not denying the fact that the film is doing very, very well. And it's amazing how many people think that what I say as truth and fact is somehow denying fact and truth. It's, again, a very odd, weird thing. But before we get any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, lap that fire button if you're watching over on Ozzy, and smash the rumble button if you're watching over there. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So again, if you were to go by just the headlines from Deadline, from Nancy, and also from our boy Tony over on there, you would say, oh man, this is awesome. Avatar 2, it's now beating Star Wars The Last Jedi's domestic numbers, right? 11 of all time before you adjust for inflation. Avatar: Way of Water, number 4 of all time, leaving The Force Awakens in its wake before you actually adjust for inflation. Then you would believe that this film is actually one of the greatest films ever made. At least that's the perception that's going out there. Or at the very least, the most successful films, or one of the most successful films. And there's no denying that the movie is incredibly successful. But the problem with this, and with The Force Awakens, and also with The Last Jedi, other than them not being very good films, is the fact that all those movies have been put on a list that does not actually take into account what these films have actually made, and also how we can actually more accurately and really be able to more justly be able to compare these movies with other films from the past that had more people go to see them, spending X amount of dollars, right? And these, again, are things that are just oftentimes not taken into account. Just by doing some basic number crunching, going over to the numbers.com, you can notice that Avatar: Way of Water, though it is very impressive with a $2.1 billion, leaving Star Wars: The Last Jedi easily in its dust. When you talk about the two things that both articles claim to do, you realize it's not actually true. Avatar: Way of Water, $2.1 billion. Force Awakens, adjusted for inflation, is $2.2 billion. Okay, let's look at the other one, too, that they mentioned. The domestic box office, $620.5 million. Wait a minute. But Star Wars: Last Jedi made $634, so it didn't pass that one up either. And again, inflation is a very important thing to keep into account because the value of the dollar today is very different than the value of the dollar than it was previously. There's also other metrics that one can use as well. I wish there was just this ultimate source of information where you could actually find out how many individual tickets were sold, how many actual people went to go see any of these movies, because that would be the only real fair way to compare anything. Obviously, any system is going to be imperfect by nature as far as when it comes to numbers, when you have things like inflation happen, when you have things like ticket prices changing over time, movie-going trends changing over time as well. All of these things, right, have to be taken into account, and it's really difficult to be able to find one system that works better than any of the others. But what we can say, right, is that these numbers that are being thrown out there, and right, these records, these so-called records that are being smashed, really in any capacity, whether it's the original 4th place holding of The Force Awakens, right, or The Last Jedi's so-called domestic holding record. Again, all of these things I think are ultimately needing to be taken into account, and I really hope that someone actually has the mind and brain power to actually try to break these things down in the best way possible to show, okay, how many actual tickets, or how many as close as we can get to actual tickets, have been sold for these movies, not just because of the fact that, he's just trying to crap on Avatar. No, it's because it's actually something, as someone who covers the box office, I think would be a awesome metric to have. If someone had a formula that you could put in, that you could be like, okay, here's how many actual tickets were sold for this movie, so this is where this film compares. Because if there's one thing that we can all admit to, it's that box office numbers have been down, right? The last 10 years especially, we've started to see this downward trajectory. And even with films like Avatar: Way of Water making crap tons of money, again, there's no one denying that $2.1 billion isn't a crap ton of money, but the fact is that even that is not able to make up for the losses that the movie theater industry has really been seeing over the past several years. And a lot of that has to do with various things. And more recently, right, the pandemic, right, taught people, hey, studios are willing to come to us, right, to go to streaming services instead. And so it's taught moviegoers to stay at home or wait for it to come on Disney Plus or Netflix or HBO Max or whatever it might be. And so you have that going on. You also have ticket prices to an insane degree, right? You look at the average ticket price for Avatar Way of Water and you compare that to some of these other films and you realize, okay, right, even though someone might justify that saying, I think that it's worth going to see it for the X amount of money, a lot of people right now don't have a lot of that expendable income as they once did. And you have to take all these things, right? And so it's just interesting to see that, once again, right, I'm so tired of the media running with these narratives that just aren't true when put to just basic scrutiny and basic mathematics. And so it is just important for us to, I think, be a little bit more honest when it comes to the coverage of this box office. And that's the reason why when people say, you talk about it with this movie, but don't talk about other films, notice how I've included both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi in this conversation, because I think that those movies had their positions also without adjusting for inflation, which I don't think is right either. But continue to whine, please. Anyway, going into the actual box office numbers, as you can see, Avatar Way of Water continuing its dominance at the domestic box office, $15.7 million, 7 weeks out from initial release. Very, very strong numbers there, only a 22% drop. This film continues to, again, do very well, $4,000 per screen, only dropping 190 screens. I thought it was actually going to drop a little bit more because the 2D showings for this movie haven't really sold that well from like the very beginning. And again, I think a lot of that was just by design. This film was really marketed so that you would want to go see this movie in, a 3D screen at the very least, or an IMAX 3D screen, right? And obviously, studios want you to go see those movies there, and that's why typically, right, any studio for any of these movies that get an IMAX release sometimes will offer posters or other things like it, so that way people actually go to see these movies. Try and incentivize people to go see these movies. And so it's just interesting that it was only 190 screens, because I figured that almost, at this point, why even have a 2D showing when the vast majority of people going to see your films are going to see it in the premium formats anyway? And that's before you take into account just the regular old 3D showings in, regular size theaters. Regardless of any of that, though, the film is still doing very, very well and is, again, not having any competition against it at the box office, which is one of the reasons why I think it is doing as well. Again, it's doing well, right, on just the surface level, but it's doing as well as it is likely because there is just nothing else to compete against it to take away any tickets. People sometimes just generally will go to the theater and say, hey, what's playing now? Or, hey, now that the, numbers have gone down a little bit, now I actually want to go see Avatar because I don't want to be in a packed theater, right? All of these are different things that could indicate the very success of the film. Also, there's people that like the movie. And again, if you like the film, go right ahead and like it. Doesn't change story problems, but hey, you're right and entitled to like whatever film you want to actually like. Coming in the number 2 spot is Puss in Boots: The Last Dance, dropping 10% from the previous week. So 6 weeks out from its initial release, still also holding very strong. Seeing a very similar, again, obviously very different level, but seeing a similar amount of success where this movie really did well after the fact. Right, the first 2 initial weeks were not all that impressive, but after that, when it really got into the crux of the holiday season, when you saw just how much money this made in comparison to its first couple of weeks, there was just, again, there was increases that happened, there were small drop-offs that happened, and essentially this movie has gotten a lot of life, probably because there's been a lot of positive press around this movie and really just a positive word-of-mouth campaign. I can't tell you how many people I've seen who left comments about, hey, you really need to see this movie. It's actually really, really good. It's actually really worth seeing. So it's just interesting to see the film do as well as it is doing in this capacity. And so I very well might have to actually go see this at some point in the future, as it is not just being recommended by a lot of people, but also, again, box office wise, crossing $300 million worldwide. Pretty impressive for a film, both of these films, right, for being chart-breaking movies in this regard. Coming in the number 3 spot, so actually climbing up the rankings a little bit, probably, aided by the fact that they added 155 screens to it, still saw a 23% drop 5 weeks out from its initial release. This film is doing much better than I think that anyone would have expected it to. It is a Tom Hanks movie, but it seems like the kind of movie that would do kind of like Oscar movie type numbers, where it doesn't really make all that much money, and it's meant to be seen by a smaller demographic, and usually a more Oscar-focused demographic, which isn't very large, especially if you look at the trends for the recent Oscars as far as their numbers and total, people watching them. Regardless of that, though, the film, just on the surface, based on what I'm initially looking at, is seemingly doing well. Again, I'll do an actual breakdown of this movie when it finishes its theatrical release, because at this point, again, it's long past the time of me being able to do a full 2-week breakdown of the movie, especially when it had that very weird release just to be able to be available for awards contention. Megan, the number 4 film this week, 34% drop here, dropping 212 screens. 4 weeks out from initial release, though, $6.3 million. This film has made about 12 times its budget already. So very impressive numbers here. I still do think that breaking $100 million is very much within the capacity for this movie. And if people at this point are still wondering, it's like, why do you talk so positive about this movie, that movie, and crap on Avatar? It's like, well, one, I very clearly don't like the film, but also, even though we could look at a movie like Avatar and say $2 billion versus, the, $300 million of some of the films that I've just mentioned. But then you compare the budget of the movie versus how much it's made, and you realize that the story is very different, right? Megan is making the amount of money based, compared to its budget that is just, again, darn impressive. We're talking about 12 times its budget, where films like Top Gun Maverick and films like Avatar looked more at like 3 to 4 times, maybe 5 times at best, their budgets instead, because they come with massive budgets attached to them. So it's just, again, very interesting to see movies like this continue to do as well as they are. Coming at number 5, I believe this is a Bollywood film, $5.9 million, coming out very small amount of screens, a great per theater ratio. This is something that's very common for these movies. So let me know in the comments if you've seen it and you think that it's worth going to see. Number 6 is the film Missing, in its second week of release, dropping 38% and breaking even. So this film has already made its money back. It's about 40,000, I think, in the black at this point. And for a movie that basically just stole the concept of the previous film that the same team did of Searching, and then decided to change a couple of story elements, it seems, again, kudos for them for being able to get enough people to go out to see it and spending so little on the movie that they didn't need to make a whole lot to actually make their money back. And so, hey, I guess take the win there, Sony, if you really want to. The Plane movie, or film just called Plane, made another $3.8 million here. And I've heard a lot of people say positive things about this movie. One interesting note is that on Friday Night Sights, Ryan of RK Outpost, shout out to him, he brought up a very good point about the film because, as I've been covering the box office, there were no international numbers for this movie. Turns out, though, it is getting released, and it has now started to make some money internationally, and it seems that this film might actually end up having a little bit of extra breath, right? Catching its breath a little bit of extra room to run, as it were, a little bit of extra runway for the plane to land. Anyway, so you could potentially see this film actually be able to make its money back. It'll really depend on where that film ends when all is said and done. You have The Wandering Earth 2. Never saw The Wandering Earth 1. I think I heard good things about it, but hard to say. $3 million at 142 screens, 21,000 per screen, so good per theater ratio there. A very weird looking movie called Infinity Pool made $2.7 million, and then you had The Left Behind Fathom event with $2.3 million, a Billie Eilish concert at number 11, and a independent film called Fear. So again, whether or not you like those films or not is anyone's guess. Interesting, Everything Ever All at Once, after getting a lot of awards contention and attention, was actually re-released at 1,400 screens and actually made $1 million. So, hey, not the best per theater ratio in the world, but this far out from your release, hey, I guess good job is to be, sent your way. Looking at the Avatar Way of Water's worldwide numbers, we have the film at $2.1 billion. So, as you can see, most of it coming clearly from the international audiences, right? This film, $1.5 billion alone, is already past, right? The international numbers for this movie is already past the entirety of what Top Gun Maverick did and many other films have done in the course of their release. So this film is very impressive when it comes to its actual numbers. What's also very impressive is the fact that when you look at how much money this film has actually given to the CCP, because remember, 75% of this money right here, $240 million to China, 75% of that goes to the CCP. And Avatar is not the only film that's done that, right? This is something that's a big Hollywood problem, right? Whether it's a Star Wars movie, a Marvel film, whatever the film is, whatever studio it comes from, tends to be Disney, but it's not always the case. Any of these films that get these China releases, right? Some people might try and say, well, don't the Chinese people deserve to see good films? It's like, well, yes, but when the vast majority of the money they spend on those movies goes right back to the party that is, killing people and doing all kinds of other human rights violations, I will always take issue with it. And I've mentioned that with every other major Marvel release. And again, people, for some reason, choose to ignore reality. Coming to the, again, one of the most interesting battles of our time, not really, but I had to say something. $620 million is where currently is where Avatar 2, The Way of Water is. But at the same point in its release, Avatar Top Gun Maverick did it again, $597 million. So the reason why I'm using this as a comp, as a comparable film, is because, as you can see, the film for Top Gun Maverick, right, is tracking ahead of where Avatar Way of Water is. So easily beating the film when it comes to its daily release. And this makes a lot of sense since that Top Gun Maverick not only had the strong word of mouth and also did very well just on the long run, especially longer as the further that it went out, it actually continued just to do very, very well. We're seeing Avatar do very similar numbers as far as people rewatching the movie, etc. It also had the benefit of coming out over the summer. And so that's one of the reasons as to why we could definitely give the edge there. What is interesting, though, is that last weekend it was actually able to edge out the total box office, as far as the actual, so like the total box office, we're starting to see Top Gun Maverick essentially be able to catch up with the movie. So as you can see, last weekend's numbers there, 7, 9, and 8, was able to beat Avatar's numbers at the same point in the release for its weekend. We actually saw it kind of swing back a little bit this weekend, whereas you saw Friday numbers there, Top Gun Maverick has the edge, the 7.8 million versus 6.3 versus for Top Gun Maverick. So again, edged out on Saturday, but then the 4.6 versus the 4.2. So as you see, this is, again, an interesting battle, because the question for me is going to be how much more money can this film make really internationally? Again, we're going to start to see some competition finally come to the box office domestically and internationally, and so I think that's going to eventually start to pull away some of those dollars, and you're going to start to see the theater get, the movie get pulled from various theaters, as what happens when you're, several weeks out from your initial release. It's still going to make a ton more money. The question, though, for me is going to be, having this film compared to, are we going to see at any point Top Gun Maverick and Avatar kind of get this point of evening out, as it were, and are we going to be able to see just how much money, again, based off of that, are we going to be able to have any type of projection? Right now, I think that $700 million is absolutely a possibility for Avatar 2, but really the question that I still have, and I don't know the answer to, is how much over $700 million will it actually make? Will it make over $718 million, which is what Top Gun Maverick edged out at? It's anyone's guess. But let's just say Top Gun Maverick has been closing the gap that was started off very successful by this movie, by Avatar, which, again, blew every film really out of the water in domestic markets, especially any film from the last few years. But interesting nonetheless to see those films compared with one another. Puss in Boots, as I mentioned, over $300 million worldwide. Very impressive numbers there. A Man Called Otto at $70.9 million. In fact, a little bit of interest here. Let's see. Puss in Boots. Nope. No. Oh, wait, it did. So there you go. $6.6 million in China. So again, I will call you out too, but at least you're not giving nearly as much money. Man Called Otto at $70.9 million. The film Megan at $146 million. Again, 12 times its budget, just insane numbers there. The film Missing at $17.5 million, breaking even with that number. Plane, as I mentioned, $3.9 million internationally. So not the most impressive numbers there for its first, again, collection of international numbers, but will be interesting to see if it's going to be able to make enough money to make its money back from the international market alone. Then there's the weird film Infinity Pool, which you have the casting of Mia Goth, who's known for being in the films, what was it, the X movie, and then there was the prequel to the movie that came out, Pearl. Again, I don't know much about it. She got a lot of attention for the Wednesday Raven Awards that I host every single year. She got nominated for Breakthrough Performance. So this has her, and then also Alexander Skarsgård. So again, it's a Brandon Cronenberg film. I don't really know much about his filmography, to be honest, but it looks like it's a weird movie, so probably not a movie that I would have any interest in, but if you've seen it, please let me know. Black Panther, $832 million, again, really is slowing down, but remember, this film will be getting a China release, so again, MCU, still under Disney, will be able to contribute even more money to the CCP, and then the Whitney Houston film is still around, but still not really doing much as far as box office is concerned. So going ahead and looking at the box office charting, because we'd like to do box office charting here. As you can see, for the film Missing, having made $17.5 million, I am projecting the film to make somewhere between $25 and $35 million when all is said and done. That's just based off of most, again, the norm and also just historical standards, because the film only costs around $7 million to make, because a lot of the technology used is just basically using what looks like webcams and iPhone cams and things like that. So, I mean, they probably use actual legit cameras and then added those effects after the fact, but don't need a whole lot of just high quality imagery in order to pull that off. And so, again, probably did not have to, again, charge nearly as much or spend nearly as much to make those effects actually happen. As you can see, though, it has broken even. So it's around 41,000 in the black at this point. So likely going to make a few $1,000,000 when all is said and done, which, again, for a movie that didn't really do a whole lot to, revamp the original story that this film is a follow-up to, again, not in a traditional sense of it's not a continuation of the story, but using the same technology, using the same tropes and everything like that they did for Searching. Again, very lazy writing there, I would say, and it's just... yeah, I hate to see films like that get money because it just incentivizes them to continue to do that. The film Plane, $29.3 million, $16 million in the red. As I said, the international numbers, though, it's starting to release in various countries. It has more countries to release in. So if it does well there, then we might see this number actually become a chart breaker. But at this point, still not there. Film Megan at $69 million in the black. Again, almost getting into the average range there of around 60%. But this is the impressive number, 12.2 times its budget, right? So even though we can look at a film like Avatar and say, wow, that's very impressive, right? It's still only about 4.6 times its budget. So again, very impressive numbers, but not anywhere close to the 12.2 million, 12.2 times, and there's no way Avatar is going to end anywhere close to that. Again, still a crap ton of money and a crap ton of profit for the movie, but still, when you are comparing how much you make versus how much you spend, it is a very impressive metric to say the very least. Whitney Houston Films still $33 million in the red. Nothing's really happening with Babylon anymore, so that's $100 million down the drain. Puss in Boots: Last Wish, $72 million. Very likely for this film to, again, this and Avatar: Way of Water, both chart breakers here, again, doing much better than what the average is. Same thing also can even be said for Babylon, despite the fact that it's a massive flop. So it goes to show you, right, you can still be a chart breaker in the percentage category, but also based on how much money you spend on it, you could also end up being a pretty massive flop. That's why all these numbers, you have to understand the nuances of what these are actually saying to be able to, I guess, fully appreciate what they're trying to say there. But anyway, Puss in Boots still making a lot of money. I'd say, again, $100 million potential. But hey, it's already won in this capacity, doing much better than any projection that I had initially had. Same thing can be said for Avatar: Way of Water as well, right? I have adjusted this to have the $460 million budget though, because the numbers is running with that as the official budget, and seeing that James Cameron himself indicated that the film needed to make probably close to $1.5 billion to break even. That makes me think, right, even though that would indicate the cost is more than $460, I'm still going to have that as the actual budget. So either way, right, you're looking at a film that will easily make $600 million in the black. Still, question will be, does that justify the amount of money you put into the project initially? Again, in their minds, I would say that they would say absolutely, especially since they're talking about records and all these other things with the movie, in addition to just making a lot of money on top of that. Again, when you're still making $600 million, even though that may not be the best per ratio, it's still pretty darn good. I'm not going to lie about that. And then when it comes to other films, those are really the only major updates that are available. Again, $124 million in the black right now for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And even though this film is getting a China release, it will be interesting to see where this film ends up when all is said and done. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Please let me know in the comments section down below, especially if you've seen any of the newer releases. Again, there were a lot of independent films that came out over the past weekend and re-releases and things like that. So let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.
And now for a huge shout out to all of my January Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with my Patreon members, Father Luca Illich, Garrett Searles, Jaimir Ari Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, who you can check out on his YouTube channel, Orange Chat Reviews, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Eagle Writer, and Miss Martin Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Miss Martin Muses, and of course the amazing Empress of the Universe, Tina B, who you can check out over on her YouTube channel, Tina B, with her show Soup to Nuts, which she does, tries to do every single week with her friend and with fellow Valkyrie and fellow mod of the channel, Stephanie B.
And also a special shout out to the Modern Major General of the channel, Laura Story. Thank you again for joining.
And of course, I do want to give a special shout out to Tina B and make sure that everyone knows that our prayers are being extended towards her as she continues to recover from complications that have occurred recently with her medically and has resulted in a loss of eyesight, or at the very least of more clear eyesight. So to continue to offer our prayers for her. Also a shout out to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, who can check out on his Twitch channel by the same name, The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and the K-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer Robert Barnes. So thank you all very much for supporting me on Local, Subscribe Star, and Patreon. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, please check out the top link in the video description below, where you get access to this, and also, of course, to a monthly podcast that I do with John the Flick Flickinger. Also, access to a giveaways channel on my Discord, where I give away films. This month, I've got films like Seven Samurai on Blu-ray from the Criterion Collection to give away, The Banshees of Inisherin, Tommy Boy Steelbook, Edge of Tomorrow 4K, and tons of other 4Ks and Steelbooks as they get released over the next month will be available, and also, of course, digital codes as well. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out that top link and join over on Patreon, Subscribe Star, or on Locals. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.